Hi, everyone. Welcome to Type Talks. Today we're here with Sue, and we're here to talk about her journey from going from ESFJ to ESTJ. And so, if you don't know Sue, she's the most well-known person with ESTJ preferences in the type community. She has an amazing body of work. I'll have her share about herself so that you get to know her a little bit. So, Sue, for people who don't know you, can you give a little bit of an intro of who you are?
Yes, absolutely. So thanks, Joyce. It's just so lovely to chat to you. I have been using Type for over 24 years now. I have a corporate background in sales and management. Before that, I was born into a family in London. There's 5 children. I have 4 siblings, including a twin sister who's an INFP. So most people are quite interested by how on earth an INFP and an ESTJ were raised as twins. So that was an interesting journey for sure. But I really got involved with type and an interest and passion for it as soon as my kids were born, or really just shortly after, when I realized that they were staggeringly different. And doing that sort of parenting journey, I realized I had my first child as a daughter, ISTJ, and my second boy 3 years later, who's an ENTP. And through the process of trying to get good at parenting, which is sort of the thing that I was doing full time, I just found type and fell in love with it because it answered so many questions. So it was, who am I as a parent? Who am I parenting? And what differences does it make to understand those 2 sets of preferences that I was dealing with? So that's where my passion came from. I then got on the qualification program with MBTI. And then to a certain extent, the rest of history. I really found that it was my mission to try and spread the word and see who else we could help, particularly in the parenting sphere. And after that, I went back to my sort of corporate background and did some work in corporates as well. But really just spreading this word of how can type influence your life in such a positive way has been something that I've been doing for the last 20 plus years by writing resources, doing programs, going to conferences, and just increasing my knowledge gradually to where it is now. And I've got a handle on a few things, I think, that's been incredibly helpful. And then finding a way to communicate that easily to people who are not steeped in the universe of type.
Yeah, what I love about you, Sue, is that you're able to communicate things in a way in which it keeps the complexity of type, but you say it in a way that's very clear and that people can get it. And so I feel like sometimes there are a lot of people with intuitive preferences in type, and they can have brilliant ways to type, but sometimes it's difficult to understand people who are coming into it.
Certainly, if you're in the type community, there's probably an 80% chance that you have an intuitive preference. So us sensing people in the type community are rather rare. But I think, as an ESTJ in this community, I absolutely love working with those with an intuitive preference. I really do. But oh my goodness, you make things complicated. So trying to sort of smooth it out is like trying to comb it through and just going, well, let's just see what the basics are. And those with sensing preferences, especially ESJs, we love using what's real and actual as a springboard for our creativity. It certainly isn't that we're not creative. We can be highly creative beings. But we need that reality as a springboard. So it's like getting to the essence of something and then sparking off from there, and including the basics in however it is that we're trying to explain things is something that I think is a sort of an MO. It's our modus operandi for life, I think.
Makes total sense. And Sue has actually had her brain scanned by Dario Nardi, and she's a harmonizing ESTJ. And so there is a warmth and empathy and reflectiveness that people of the subtype have in comparison to people of their type 2. I feel like the ESTJs get stereotyped a lot, and it can be hard to really point out someone who's not a stereotype. And so I think that you're a great example of someone who definitely knows the theory really well, is an ESTJ. And I think that we could definitely go over the journey of your type. So ESFJ was the type that you got on an instrument when you first started, and that was 24 years ago.
Yeah, you're totally right about ESTJs being stereotyped. certainly that sort of bullish, must get something done now. I mean, they exist for sure. But you know, when I first started out, I was reading these ESTJ type descriptions and just being somewhat horrified by them. I was like, oh my goodness, this is seriously not where I sit. But then neither did I sit on the ESFJ side. So it took me quite a while to sort of work through my understanding of type, to realize that I had a T preference and not an F preference. And then that understanding of the cognitive processes and how they can, you know, how you can use extroverted thinking in a really positive way. But I, you know, in slightly preparing for this interview, Joyce, of course, you know, ESTJs over prepare for everything. I did have a little look at my early signs, really, like looking back on it, how I now know that my ESTJ preferences started from quite a long time ago. So I wrote a little list for you. So here's my little list. So the early signs I think I have that extroverted thinking preference is that I had a joy of primary school. Like, I loved the routine. I was so much happier going to school and having the routine and knowing exactly what I was going to be doing and throughout the day. In my primary school years, I went to school with a briefcase. I had all of my pens and pencils in like color order. So there was the yellows that went to the greens, that went to the blues, that went to the, you know, and that was a natural thing for me to do that. I used to play this game called Jacks, that was like a sort of a ball and counter game. And I got quite good at it. And there were lots of older girls that I befriended because they were much better at it than my peers. And so I went to play with them rather than, you know, play with my peers, so I could play at their level. My favorite day at high school by far was the day that I got my timetable for the year. I just loved knowing where I would be. And then when I left school, I definitely wanted to go to work. Like, I just knew that if somebody put me in a library anymore, that I would just die a death. You know, even a double library period at school was just a horrendous thing for me. It was just like a struggle to get through it. I wanted to be independent. I wanted to leave home. And I remember my mum asking me about sort of what I wanted to do after school. And she said, well, darling, you know, what do you like doing? And I clearly remember saying to her, I like filling out forms. It was just like, I was like, where? And so it was just sort of extraordinary. I just loved having things sort of organized and sorted. And so I went into work in a travel agency. I ended up with business travel. I ended up planning trips all around the world for people who were doing, you know, large business trips. And I kind of loved it, you know, before I went into sort of management and that kind of thing, again, in the aviation industry, in that case, in British Airways. So that sort of route was very definitely ESTJ before I knew anything about type at all. So then I stopped working to raise my family. So I had my daughter, Louisa, first, and then my son followed shortly afterwards, 3 years later, emigrating to New Zealand in between. And it was then that I found out about Myers-Briggs, got heavily invested in it. I just went to a couple of evenings that were, you know, run by somebody locally, and I saw somebody presenting on Myers-Briggs, and I immediately said to myself, I want to do that. That's the job that I want to do. But I also want to do it to help people understand their children and parenting and that kind of thing. But I was raising 2 preschoolers at the time, and I was a full-time mum at home. And so I took the MBTI, like the proper, you know, the questionnaire, and I came out as an ESFJ, not even slightly T. Like, I was really, you know, I was really sure that I had an F preference. But it was because of the work that I was doing at the time. You know, I was raising my kids. I was putting a lot of care and effort and attention into raising these 2 gorgeous children who I obviously love to bits. And so that extroverted feeling was what I was doing a lot of the time. So I thought. But in fact, you know, I think that the sort of misunderstanding of extroverted thinking from various quarters is that it is about serving others in many respects, especially if you have that sort of harmonious element to ESTJ. Or if those of you who might be familiar with step 2 of the MBTI, I was an accepting ESTJ as opposed to a questioning ESTJ. And so all of those things softened down that thinking preference. So it is not like a drill sergeant major or, blowing whistles all the time and getting people to do what they're supposed to do. I think that's one of those sort of misinterpretations of ESTJ, but it was a very, very gentle version of that preference with an absolute aim to look after by completing tasks. I think one of those two words that I think explain the TNF preference before you go down the cognitive processes route, which of course is extremely important, is task versus relationship. And with ESTJs, the first thing you do if somebody comes to you with a problem, even a personal friend, of course you offer your empathy, your sympathy, but what your head is doing is going, so what can I do? How can I organize things so that this person has a better outcome than what might happen if I don't? So that task relatedness is very much more ESTJ, but it's done with a desire to have a positive impact on people. But it's hugely this task orientation.
Yeah, those are really good points, that being a mother can make you look like you use extroverted feeling, like you're an FJ type when you're not. Of any type, you can look more deceivingly not your type.
Yeah, most definitely.
Because you have to be nurturing.
Yeah, your biology kicks in. You're maternal. Everybody has maternal instincts to a certain degree, and they will just present themselves in different ways.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering what the moments of doubt, when they started kicking in, when you're like, I'm not an ESFJ. I'm noticing these things are not connecting.
Sure. Well, I got so interested in type. I went to every single type thing you could possibly imagine. I went to conferences. It took me quite a while to get qualified, because at the time you needed a degree in education or psychology, and I didn't have either of those things. So it took me 3 years to get on the qualification program or the certification program. But I just went, we had interest groups in Auckland and New Zealand. We had all sorts of, we had conferences going on. So I went to all of them because I was just fascinated by it. And I just found that I was sitting in the wrong group. So they put us in type-alike groups to do various exercises, and I'd be sitting with the Fs or the FJs or the ES, whichever group you like to choose. And I was just thinking, oh my goodness, if we could just move on from this discussion now, I'd be very happy. I just found, going to the STJ or the TJ or the Ts or whatever it is group, I was just like going, okay, yeah, this is definitely more comfortable for me. Yeah, I can leave that thing behind. I think having my preferences, we tend to, at times, avoid being emotional. We park it. We don't go there. We will procrastinate having an emotion on something, and we will just deal with the problem that we've got in front of us. Also, talking to people who were often, coaches or therapists of some description, I knew that I could be a certain type of coach. I love coaching. It's a particular joy when I find another ESTJ female that I can talk to, because then we just sort of sit and just in the same space, which is really, really lovely. But I sort of realized that the coaching I was going to do was not like other coaching or therapy. I did not want to see the same person every week for an hour for a year or 3. That was not going to be my way of coaching. It was more mentoring. It's like, I've got this body of information. I'm going to pass it on to you. I'm going to help you use it in as best as way as you can. But I don't need to be seeing you every week for the next 3 years. That's therapy. I knew I was never going to be a therapist or a psychotherapist. That wasn't my bag at all.
It's the type-alike groupings that really showed you I don't fit in with the ESFJs because I'm in a group full of ESFJs, and I just don't relate to how they're describing things. And then you went into the more ESTJ groupings, and you're like, I can relate to this thought process. is behind this.
Yeah, this sat much better with me. Some were sort of not as soft as thinking preferences I have, and every now and then I go, oh, that's a bit harsh. But generally speaking, there was some, there was definitely some correlations there that I took on board much more than with the feeling preference group. Yeah, for sure. Mm.
Yeah, and I also want to bring the audience's attention to, like, when I asked you at the beginning to explain your journey from ESFJ to ESTJ, you started in sequential order of you as a child, and then you illustrated up.
Yeah.
And a quality of introverted sensing is sequentially letting us know the details of something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think, whenever you work out your dominant preference, I guess one of the confusions I had also was that to be confused over T and F was like being confused on my dominant function. And I was sort of I was very unsure about that. Like, if this is my dominant function, how can it be such a problem for me to identify? But when you see it as the whole, as the whole package, as we now sort of know how that cognitive process stack, for want of a better word, works, you sort of realize, the importance of extroverted sensing. I am informed by sort of introverted sensing. That informs me and allows me to do my job of extroverted thinking even better. So I think once you know your dominant function and you realize that it's your hero function, and all of the other functions are trying to assist that hero function. All of them, all of the ones that are in your conscious or in your unconscious, even the ones that are, quite a long way away. Like extroverted feeling is in the 8th position for me. And I've sort of got an explanation now for how that works. But it's also there to sort of help the dominant function do what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah. You can tell what your dominant function is by how all the other functions are helping it achieve its aims, for sure, like you mentioned.
Yeah, they're all there. Extroverted feeling is definitely there for me. It plays a very different role. It's not where I'm comfortable. I remember thinking, those with extroverted feeling dominance are really fabulous at hospitality. It's natural for them to say, oh, let me include you and let me introduce you, and it's so effortless for them. It's beautiful. Whereas I can do it. Absolutely, I can do it, but it exhausts me. It's very tiring. Whereas your dominant function is, as you know well, like you could just keep on going. Give me something to organize. Thank you. It just keeps running for you, and it's the ease with which it happens. So there's a couple of metaphors that I have for extroverted thinking that I've used over the years, and one of them is the Sudoku puzzle. So having a TJ brain, having that extroverted thinking brain, is rather like completing a Sudoku puzzle with joy. It's just like, let me work out where these numbers fall. You've got to have 1 to 9 in this box. You've got to have 1 to 9 in that column, in that row. Let me use all of my powers of logic to work out where all of those numbers go, and then complete it, and then ta-da! That is great. That is certainly extroverted thinking at work. But the other thing is that I ask people to imagine making a salad dressing. And you put in the oil and you put in the vinegar, and then you shake it all about, and whatever ingredients you've got in there, and you shake it all out. And then you let this salad dressing stand. And then what happens? It separates. The oil goes on the top, the vinegar goes on the bottom, whichever way it is. The vinegar's on the top of the oil, but it separates out into its layers. And did that dressing have to do any work to do that? No, it just did it. And that's extroverted thinking working well. Is you don't have to think about it. You just take in information. For me, using introverted sensing. So going back to what is known very frequently. What's my experience? If I've got something new to do, I will say, well, have I done this before? How did it work? I can get anxious if it didn't work before, because I'm not taking a positive experience into my current experience. but that ability to sort data into a workable, usable platform is extroverted thinking at work, and it's hassle-free. It's automatic, just like your introverted intuiting. Is you don't have to try hard. It just sits there waiting for you to have some joy with it.
Yeah, and like you said, the dominant function is energizing.
Yeah, for sure.
And so if you're not feeling that, that's a big red flag that maybe you should your type.
Yeah, and I think when your dominant function is extroverted, for extroverted thinking, feeling, sensing, intuiting, there's an element to you that looks around to everybody else in your world and says, haven't you noticed how well I've done that? It needs to be seen. Whereas I think those with an introverted dominant function don't quite have that unspoken, very frequently, that unspoken need for it to be noticed. Whereas I think the dominant extroverted function people kind of do.
Yeah, that makes sense. It could also be slightly Enneagram related too. Like if someone were an Enneagram 3, for instance, there is some concern with image and people noticing what you're doing as well.
Yeah, so my Enneagram is 2, and it's a 2 social.
Yeah, and that's the leader too, as well too. And so because you're an image type, you're in the heart triad, you're gonna like compliments more in general too. So and so your experience being a social too might have also been confusing in figuring out your type as well, because people stereotypically associate ESFJ with 2. And so you might have had to work through that as well in some ways.
Yeah, I think the most common Enneagram combination for ESTJs would be 3 or 8. And I read those and rejected them. Too hard. I'm so not like that. Yeah.
And the leader too could be very extroverted thinking dominant as well, because you are taking charge to be a helpful person. Being an SJ type, they're also known as the guardians or the stabilizers. And so there is a desire to caretake and to help and to be generous, because you're an affiliative type. That's going to look in some ways like pseudo-FE. And it's very two-like in a way as well too. Yeah.
And we were talking before we started recording, Joyce, about Dario's work on the different variants. And I'm a harmonizing ESTJ. And there's quite a difference in how you're using extroverted thinking, whether it's analytic or holistic. So again, a couple of metaphors I have for that. If you have analytic use of extroverted thinking, then it's very, very much the sort of blow a whistle, tell everybody where to go, direct the traffic. It's like this policeman in the middle of a roundabout that's just telling all the traffic where to go. But the metaphor I have for that holistic extroverted thinking is trying to, how you can get the playing cards and you can make these little sort of structures out of them, and you put the playing cards all together very carefully, and then you put a line on the top, and then you're very carefully building and structuring something. And that's holistic extroverted thinking. It's not dictating. It's carefully crafting. And that's the extroverted thinking that I recognize in myself for sure. How do you carefully craft something so that it's a workable solution? It's really where I sit.
I see holistic TE almost like a weird example I have for it is, let's say you notice the thing that is not efficient or effective. Sometimes you might take one for the team and then take that option so that other people have the better option. Like, let's say there's a chair that's very ergonomically not friendly, and you can immediately tell that, like, extroverted thinking wise, it makes no sense for a chair to be designed like that. And you might be annoyed that anyone chose to design a chair like that, but you're like, it's either I have to do it or someone else has to sit in the chair. So I'm just going to sit in there to take one for the team. So extroverted thinking can be very selfless in certain times, and no one will know, just because you spotted the inefficiency first. And so you have that choice of whether or not you want to take that responsibility for the group.
Yeah, definitely. Extroverted thinking has ability to spot fault and error. Somewhat similar to introverted thinking, but definitely, I can look at anything and immediately zoom in on the error, and I just have to really hold myself back from saying, there's this and this and this wrong with it. And I've learned to do that. So, I think, finally, Jung's individuation comes into the fore, and you learn that that's not the right thing to do. But I also heard recently an expression that I rather liked, and I sort of thought, yeah, this works for harmonizing ESTJ too. Somebody was describing a situation. He said, "I panicked slowly," and I think that that's a good way of putting it. Like if you don't use that extroverted thinking in a wise way, you can become a dictator. But if you do, then you'll just go, let me sit back on this for a while. I'll panic slowly. I'm not going to get into a hot-headed mess. I'm just going to work out how we're going to just sort this problem out. Yeah.
Yeah. And it can appear in very quiet ways. Like, let's say, for example, the dishes have to be washed. And so you already have a plan for exactly the most efficient way to do that. And so you're just going to quietly do it while everyone has fun. And so it can actually be very kind and altruistic as well. It doesn't have to be a bulldozy.
Yeah. There's actually, you're quite right. Even on that simple example, there's been many a dinner party at my house where I have quietly gone to the kitchen and sorted things out while everybody else is still around the table, because I kind of liked it. It was a pleasure for me. And even if somebody came out and said, "Oh, let me help you," I'm really absolutely fine. You don't need to help me at all. But, obviously you have to deal with every situation as it plays out.
Yeah. And it's because, like, when you're an EJ, Dario Nardi calls the EJs expedient decision making. So if you lead with TE or FE, you want to do things to get them done. And it's like, all right, if I watch them now, I don't have to worry about them later. So I'm just going to go there and do it.
Yeah. So. Yeah. The EJs can be a bit like, running a hurdle race especially the ETJs, you know where you're heading, you know where the hurdles are, you've got to jump over all the hurdles, except that you'll finish the race and you can look back sometimes and just not realize that you've knocked over half the hurdles in your rush to get there. So it can feel like that. On a bad day, ETJs can very much be like that. We just haven't noticed that we've knocked some things over.
Yeah. So there can be some impatience to being an extroverted.
Yeah.
To give an audience illustration, a TJ type can be super annoyed if someone is in charge of the Google Maps to get somewhere and they're totally heading the wrong direction in a very inefficient way. And it's like, all right, this is actually really poorly done.
Or even last night, I sent out an email yesterday, given I'm in New Zealand and I work with a lot of people in the UK as well. And I sent out an email to about 25 people. And I woke up this morning expecting some responses. I'm like, how does this work? They got the email, you're supposed to answer it straight away and they will be fine. But no, nobody had done that. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'll just let them. That's all right. I'll wait. But that immediate need for a response, I think, is EJ, definitely ETJ, and it's a learning experience to go, you know what? It doesn't matter. It's fine. We're not late yet to do this. It's all right. But I think we can be very annoying.
Yeah. I think it's good. It keeps the ball moving along, and you like to close the loop so that you can relax. And so you want things to go according to plan. So there are types that can also be impatient that are not ESTJs. Like, let's say an ESTP or an ESFP can also be impatient, but they're not planning, so it's more impulsive. They want to do it right now in the moment. An ESTP is impatient because you're kind of getting in the way of their plan if you don't respond.
Precisely. Yeah, precisely, because the plan's formulated, the plan's already done, and then the work to meet that plan starts early. And I think the understanding of type in my life, and in anyone who really gets to know this, is so helpful. It is so huge to really get inside the heads of somebody else, even a little bit. So I think so often, our inner selves are comparing with everybody else's outer self. And what the understanding of type gives you, as you well know, Joyce, because you know it so well, is a little glimpse as to what might be going on inside somebody else's head. What might that be like? And I've written quite a few resources where I've had to write type descriptions, which I've really enjoyed. And I never do more than one a day, and I get my whole head space into being an ISTP or an ENFJ. I can't do more than one a day, because you sort of have to marinate in it to be able to write something that sounds like it should be an ISTP or an ENFP or whatever it is. And just sort of get that sense of what it might be like to have those preferences, which is a really educational process to sort of dive into that. And on a given day, I might choose which one I do. You've got 16 type descriptions to write about. You can go, well, who do I want to be today? It's like, I do not want to be an ENFP today. That is not where I'm. So, you can choose one of them and just go, yeah, this one's suiting me today. I can be that one. So it's, ESTJs can place themselves in that way as well, but with the outcome in mind. Like, I need to write a type description. This is why I'm doing it.
Yeah. And I worked with Sue Blair on a few projects. Right now we're writing a book on type from every angle, trying to illustrate the typology theory from different vantage points to help people understand the different schools of thought and how they sit together. And also Sue is helping me edit the ESTJ book as well, that is written already and just it needs a proofread, and also some edits. And it's quite interesting how you approached it. You told me, Joyce, I'm going to spend 2 hours every day on doing work for this book. And I'm like, that's so structured of you. And you're like, when I commit myself to something, I get it done till the end. So it's kind of like, in a way, you like to give people some form of assurance in an end product.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also I sort of know where my energy is at with it as well. More than 2 hours on doing that kind of, in our case, sort of detailed work and detailed thinking. I know I can balance myself out if that's what I do.
Yeah, so I'm really thankful to have your help there. But I do find it's like very structured. Like, it's so organized. Because I've written books with ENFPs and ISFPs that will be out one day, and they write when they feel like it, and they don't give any assurances to when it'll be done. You just kind of have to have faith that they will finish it.
Yeah. No, if it's started, it's going to be finished. Yeah, for sure. And having that sort of deadline. But I do, I'm also very aware of your preferences as an INFJ. So I don't want to ESTJ you too much. So so I can feel myself saying to you, sorry to push you on this, but if we could decide on this, then I can get on and do that. So I think we work well together, Joyce. It's going well.
Yeah, it's really nice. And so, Sue, before we close off today's video, I would like to hear your definition of the top 4 functions that you have. How do you experience TE?
Okay. So TE is my dominant function. I think probably over the course of our chat, people will realize it is a structuring function. It is we construct. We can't help ourselves but construct. Whatever the outcome is. I mean, something that I will do regularly is if I think about something that needs to be done, I will tell various people that that's what I'm doing, and I will extrovert it so that I know that that's going to be done. I cannot not do it if I've extroverted that thought. So extroverted thinking allows me to sort of structure not just my world, but what's going on in my head, and that's Sudoku-like way. So that's what I love doing. That's where I can sit for a long time. It is assisted by introverted sensing, which comes along to give me that wealth of experience. And I think that in some quarters in the Myers-Briggs world, in the type community, they think of introverted sensing as this somewhat boring function. You know, oh, how dull. You know, maybe in another life, then you'll be lucky enough to have an intuitive preference. But it actually is this rich source of memories that we carry with us in this wonderful way. Obviously, not all our memories are good, and we remember those very well too. But being able to recall all of that stuff and bring it into this sort of planning mode that you've got with your extroverted thinking is also joyful in a way. It's like, what have I done before that can help me with this thing that I've got to do now? And then we've got extroverted intuiting, which I've realized is kind of my playground. You know, I can do all of these little ideas, but I eliminate so many of them if they're not worth being put into the plan. So you just, you can sort of dance around with it. Interestingly enough, I'm married to an ENTP, and he has a million ideas all the time. You know, there's a million ideas, and I ignore most of them, which is probably really upsetting. So we sort of let, you know, just go, oh yeah, good idea, good idea. Yeah, that's not going to happen because of this, and that's not going to happen because of that. But and so I don't take a lot of his ideas as seriously as he would like me to, because this is his dominant function, and that's where his extroverted intuiting is, where he does the work. Whereas my extroverted intuiting is where I kind of have play with it. So you can see where that function is a mismatch. But you know, we've learned to work it out. We've been married for 35 years, so I think we've sussed it by now. And then introverted feeling is really important. So introverted feeling is that mission and purpose. Like, why are you doing all of this? Like, why are you organizing, you know, as I am doing at the moment? There's a type conference in Copenhagen. If anybody is interested, please come along. And I'm organizing that. But why am I doing it? And it's because this understanding is so important. You know, there has been such a pain point for me in my life from not understanding it, that how can we put this across so that it helps other people? So that it's almost like the fuel in the tank. You know, extroverted thinking is my car. Introverted feeling is the fuel in the tank that drives me to get to where I need to go to. So that fourth function, that what is my mission and purpose, drives that need to just put it out there in the world. And also having my twin sister with INFP preferences, where she's the opposite to me. You know, introverted feeling is her dominant function, extroverted thinking is down below. You know, I can also say this is, you know, in your world, what you are doing is so important. You know, she's such a sort of quiet, artistic, spiritual person. But let's put that out there. You know, let's get something done about this. And she goes, oh yeah, I think I really should. So, you know, those two, introverted feeling and extroverted thinking, have got a lovely combination when they are married, when they're together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're such a wonderful well of knowledge, Sue. You've been enriching the tech community for a very long time, and you're able to explain type in a way where it's easy to understand while retaining the complexity of it as well too. And that's why we're writing Type from Every Angle, because when I saw that the way that you created visuals or the way that you write is so beautifully written, that I was like, wow, this could change the type field, because you can make it in a way where everyone can understand it.
Well,
so
thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. In fact, I have a bit of a word for it. I call it simplexity. And that is keeping it simple, but honoring the complexity. So yeah, you can use that one, Joyce. It's a new word. Yeah.
I find the ST types are really good at being practical realists. So you can take something and make it practical. You can take something, simplify it, make it realistic. So
I found it really to be helpful within, you know, when I work in corporates who've got a lot of STs, you know, trying to take psychology and put it in a place where they feel they can use it, which is what I have had to do, is get through some of the acres of prose to get to the nugget that can actually help. Mm.
Yeah, well
Yeah,
put.
sure. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for that, Joyce.
And so thank you so much, Sue, for coming out. You're a wonderful example of a non-stereotypical ESTJ. And this is how we're actually going to give more color to type. Like, we actually show the spectrum of a type. Like, you're such a sweet person. And so I feel like it'll help
you.
disarm people who have prejudice towards ESTJs for any reason, and you
Mm.
show them an amazing example. So
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there are some soft ESTJs, and I've known people who say I'm quite frightened of ESTJs and ENTJs, but some of them particularly said, but knowing you has made me much less fearful. So if I can do that, then that's a good thing.
all right, cool. And so on that note, thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you all in the next episode.